Hi everyone, Goofyword here, back with another episode of Totally Obscure, where we look at the coolest things you can do with the cards you didn't know you should be playing in Commander. Today we have a rare from the Invasion set, but no, unfortunately it's not Alabaster Leech. Today's card is Teferi's Response. Let's take a look. Teferi's Response is 1 and a blue for an instant that says counter target spell or an ability an opponent controls that targets a land you control. If a permanent's ability is countered this way, destroy that permanent. Draw 2 cards. While at first glance Teferi's Response may seem too situational to find use in every game of Commander, there are a couple of ways that we can ensure, or at least encourage, our opponents to target our lands. The first is by having high-value utility lands like Gaia's Cradle, Tolarian Academy, or Nykthos, Shrine to Nyx. By having some of those lands in play, you're going to encourage your opponents to find their Strip Mine, or their spell that happens to target a land, and we can use Teferi's Response to counter that. The thing that makes Teferi's Response special is the ability came from a permanent destroy that permanent clause. There aren't too many permanents with destroy a land abilities, but the few that there are going to be severely hosed by Teferi's Response. Most decks have at least 1 or 2 ways to target a land to destroy problematic utility lands. It's usually in the form of something like Wasteland, Strip Mine, Field of Ruin. If an opponent happens to be using Dust Bowl as their way to destroy your non-basic lands, you're in great shape. If you use Teferi's Response after an activation of Dust Bowl, they will have sacrificed a land and you'll get to destroy the Dust Bowl itself, all while protecting your land and drawing 2 cards. Aside from playing must-answer utility lands, you can also encourage your opponents to target your land by turning it into a massive threat all on its own. This card works perfectly in Noyan Dar, Royal Shaper, because every time you cast an instant or sorcery, you'll put 3 +1/+1 counters on target land. You can target the same land with this ability every time, so before long you'll have a must-answer threat. Then when your opponents point a kill spell at it, you'll be able to use Teferi's Response to counter that spell and draw 2 cards for just 2 mana. Awakening of Vitu-Ghazi is similar to Noyan Dar, and it's going to make 1 land a big threat, but Awakening does it all on its own for 5 mana. Then, your opponents are going to want to target it, and you'll be able to use Teferi's Response to counter the spell and maybe even destroy a permanent, along with drawing 2 cards. Acidic Slime is a commonly played card that's going to come into the battlefield and destroy target land. If your opponent targets one of your lands with it, you'll be able to counter the land destruction and destroy the Acidic Slime itself because it's the permanent that had that ability. This is a complete blowout. They aren't even left with the 2/2 Death Touch body. If you're willing to travel to Magical Christmas Land with me, we could use Teferi's Response to counter a Casualties of War that targets one of your lands. Because Teferi's Response says counter the spell that targets your land, it will counter the entire Casualties of War. So your opponent just spent 6 mana, probably most of their turn, for you to counter it and draw 2 cards. Obviously that is the absolute best case scenario, but when it happens, you'll feel like an absolute god. Hopefully you've enjoyed learning about the magical powers of Teferi's Response. All you have to do is have a land worth destroying, and then completely destroy your opponent's hopes and dreams when they target it. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and as always, leave me a comment with the name of the totally obscure card you would want to see me cover next. Until then, have an awesome day,